All right, let's go ahead and start with the hurricane response. Your father, former President Donald Trump, has been highly critical of the current administration's response. So to start, is he in touch with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and other local officials as we are seeing Hurricane Milton approach Florida?
Yeah, my father knows the governor incredibly well. It's obviously state Haley that we live in, and my father has been critical about the response. I mean, my wife was in North Carolina 2 days ago when people are coming up to her crying, saying no one's here. We're not getting the resources, we're not getting the aid we need. Kamala came out and said, listen, I'm going to give $750 to people affected by a storm. And these incredible people are watching their homes float down rivers. They're watching their houses and everything that they've ever owned, their belongings get wiped out in mudslides. And I mean, it's gone. It's all gone. And yet you see Mayorkas come out and say that FEMA is out of money. Yet we give $200 billion to Ukraine. We give money to every country around the world. We gave $150 billion to Iran, a country that chants death to America. And yet you have an administration that allowed FEMA to run out of money, all days before a Category 5 is about to wipe out Tampa. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable to Americans. They're so out of touch. It's the antithesis of America last, not America first. And you've got a lot of people who are suffering in this country because of these natural disasters, and more tonight. There's no question, more tonight based on what we're seeing rolling in. And yet, they're offering people $750 to try and rebuild their entire lives. It's truly horrible. There's nothing that I've seen in politics in the last 10 years that I think is more disappointing than that statement.
But Eric, some of those claims are ones that the administration has debunked. For instance, the $750, that's an initial upfront payment while the agency processes other sorts of disaster relief available to survivors. And FEMA has warned about the dangers of misinformation surrounding those relief efforts, including some of those claims you just said and that your father has repeated about FEMA funding going to house undocumented migrants. They've said that is a totally separate stream from the disaster relief fund, and that, as we mentioned, $750 cap on aid, he has said. So why spread misinformation to Americans who are looking for FEMA help?
Haley, do you really believe
that? Well, there is that funding is appropriated by Congress, and as you know, there's stipulations on how money appropriated by Congress is used.
Haley, we have 157 hotels in New York that are filled with illegal immigrants right now that cost taxpayers of this country over $1 billion. We gave Ukraine over $200 billion so that young kids can shoot at each other in trenches, and we can see it every single night being played on YouTube. Yet FEMA, in the middle of the worst hurricane season we've probably seen in a century, has run out of money. There's no money left in FEMA. They don't have a reserve.
But Eric, they've not said they've run out for this response.
So I think Haley, I think it's so disingenuous when people say this, oh, this is just a first step, and they talk about misinformation. It's not misinformation. FEMA has run out of money. Alexander Mayorkas has talked about running out of money, right? You have Kamala Harris, who's talked about $750 when people's lives have been destroyed. You had National Guard who got there 7 days too late based on the fact that even Joe Biden is admitting that they were asleep at the wheel and that the response has been, quote unquote, very slow. And yet you want to defend them for doing the worst job of any administration dealing with a natural disaster. When my wife is in North Carolina, her home state, and she's literally being approached by people who are devastated. Their lives are devastated. Loved ones are gone. Their cars are gone. Their homes are gone. Every picture they've ever taken in their lives are gone. And there's no one there to help them. And then you get to hear about an administration that's out of money despite spending over $1 billion housing illegal immigrants in 157 of the most expensive hotels in New York. It's awfully disappointing that the mainstream media, touting the general nonsense of the left, will come out and somehow compliment them for the job that they're doing. And every American knows that they've done a terrible job. And every person in North Carolina, and every person in Georgia, and every person in South Carolina, and a lot of Florida, they recognize that they've been let down once again by our country.
But Eric, the Shelter and Services Program is a separate appropriated fund authorized by Congress from the Disaster Relief Fund. And in 2019, reportedly, your father took money from the disaster fund to help fund detention space for migrants back in 2019. So let me ask you, in a second Trump administration, would he take a different tact? Would he pursue increasing the disaster relief fund?
You know what my father will do? My father will build a wall. My father won't have 157 hotels in New York City, the most expensive hotels in the world, filled with illegal immigrants, while veterans sleep homeless on streets of this country. My father will not allow, 20 million people in this country. He will not allow 320,000 children a year to die of fentanyl poisoning that's coming over the southern border. And he will make sure that FEMA is funded so that when people's lives are destroyed, there's somebody there to help them out, versus giving $150 billion to Iran like Obama did, or giving $200 billion to Ukraine like this administration has done, to fight senseless wars that don't benefit the American people. Americans are being left behind.
So he'll
Americans
pursue increasing the fund?
My father would certainly, well, if you're talking about a fund to take care of Americans, my father would absolutely increase a fund to take care of Americans. How in the world does FEMA run out of money? How in the world does a country that gives $200 billion to Ukraine not be able to sit back and say, you know what, we might want to have a rainy day fund, right? We might want to put $20 billion in a rainy day fund, in the event that we have a really bad storm season, in the event that we need reserves, in the event that it, surpasses what we budget on an annual basis. Why is it that America is always last? We need to start putting this country first again, and it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable that people whose lives have been destroyed get $750. And it's inexcusable that the media doesn't call them out for it and literally touts their narrative and their nonsense.
Again, that $750 is the first time payment to help in that immediate period while they're being processed for other programs. But when it comes to FEMA funding, they have asked for a supplemental in the past, and they've indicated that they'll likely have to ask again by the end of the year. So has your father advised Speaker Johnson on whether to call Congress back for a special session to deal with hurricane relief?
My father wants to see hurricane relief. My father wants to see people in this country taken care of. My father wants to see Americans come first. We're not coming first. 20 million illegal immigrants that came across the border are doing substantially better in terms of what they're receiving than veterans who are sleeping on streets who fought for our nation. We're seeing that time and time again. Americans are coming in last. So yeah, you better believe my father would support anybody in this country. You better believe my father thinks that, this has been the greatest calamity of a response to a national disaster ever. There were people stuck in cars, dead in cars, and no one showed up for 6, 7, 8 days. Again, even Biden's acknowledging that it's incredibly slow. It's such a catastrophe. We're the #1 country in the world. We're the greatest superpower in the world, and we can't take care of our own. We take care of everybody else. We need to have some inward reflection. And Haley, it's not just this. What about education in this country? We're ranked 30th in the world in terms of education, yet we're sending $200 billion to Ukraine, $150 billion to Iran. Why can't we fix our educational system? Why can't we have our kids be #1 in the world in terms of education, not number 30th in the world? Why is it that we're always last? And this is what profoundly bothers myself. It's what profoundly bothers my father. And I think it's what profoundly bothers the vast majority of Americans, who adore my father and thank him for standing up and fighting this fight, because they all realize that we're not being put first. We're being put last as Americans.
So will he tell Speaker Johnson to bring Congress back then to deal with hurricane funding?
I don't know what his conversations are going to be with Speaker Johnson, but I can guarantee you he wants funding for people who have been devastated by these storms. And by the way, the hurricane is about 150 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. It's about to come across the state. The images that we're going to see tonight, where a Cat 5 or Cat 4 hits a major United States city, when FEMA is out of funds, is absolutely unthinkable. As a country, we should have a rainy day fund. I mean, no pun intended based on but we should have a rainy day fund for exactly this, a more than active hurricane season. And we don't. We run out of money as a country because we're willing to send it all around the world. It's not okay. It's just not okay.
And these hurricanes that we are seeing have had significant impacts on states that are key for the election: Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Looking ahead, are you concerned about voter engagement among Republicans as a result?
Well, clearly, temporary voter locations have to pop up in certain areas in North Carolina specifically, where you literally have counties that have been absolutely devastated. The structures are just gone, right? And so that's That's obviously something that the state's going to do, and that's obviously something as a campaign we'll work with, right? I mean, you need to be able to maintain, basic democracy, despite tragedy. What I will tell you is I can tell you that there's a lot of people out there who are not happy with this response, right? Not happy at all with how they were treated. And, does that factor into an election? I happen to think, based on, so many of the outcries for help that we've heard, so many people who've just been left behind. I wouldn't be surprised if more people in a certain, it's just, once again, the government has failed, and it would not have failed under my father.
And so when we look at the campaign, we're less than a month until Election Day, obviously. What are the areas you think your father still needs to make more inroads in this final stretch to Election Day?
Everywhere. I mean, I can tell you the man is working incredibly hard. I'm working incredibly hard. We love this country. We're the last family that needs to be doing this. Believe me, my father's life would have been a lot better not taking bullets literally and kind of figuratively, but we love this country, and we're going backward in every regard. I mean, America has become too expensive to live in. Look at mortgages today, 8% versus 2.5% under my father. Look at the price of rent. I mean, rent's gone through the roof. It's crazy how much it's gone up. Look at utilities. Look at energy. Look at the price of gas. Gas is 3x what it was under my father. My father had $1.89 gas, and look where gas prices are now. Look at auto insurance. Look at homeowners insurance, right? Look at the cost of eggs and bacon and just general groceries. I mean, this all the while people having gotten raised in this nation in a 4-year period of time, right? I mean, we've got real problems. You also have manufacturing that's leaving this country. You have the educational problem that we just talked about, ranked 30th in the world. You have wars breaking out all over the place. Look at the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East was in harmony under my father, and now every day you see our greatest ally, Israel, being bombarded by Iran. Iran was broke. You look obviously at Russia and Ukraine. That war needs to be stopped. It needs to be stopped immediately. Too many senseless lives are being taken there. You look at China and their aspirations for kind of world dominance, and their aspirations. They look at Taiwan. You've got real problems around the world, and you have a president that's literally sleeping on a beach on a Monday, sunbathing. You have a vice president candidate who literally won't do an interview. You haven't interviewed her, have you, Haley? I mean, she won't do a formal interview. She did a podcast called "Call Me Daddy." I mean, I wouldn't say that this is hard-hitting journalism. And it's really tragic. Yeah, my father's out there working 20 hours a day. I mean, it's just in every state. He has to fight against the entire mainstream media in this country, and I'm not sure if he's ever had more enthusiasm than he does right now. The level of support is tremendous because people realize how bad it's gotten, and people just want their country back. So I'm incredibly proud of him. He's my best friend in the world. He's had to stand up to the unthinkable, and he's done a phenomenal job. And I really believe on November 5th we're going to win this.
And Eric, while we have not interviewed Vice President Harris during her time as a candidate, we also haven't interviewed your father during this election cycle, and we do still welcome that opportunity. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that. Now, your father and Vice President Harris have only, we welcome him on anytime. And I'll follow up with you on that. And so your father and Vice President Harris have only debated once. CNN has offered a second debate at the end of the month. Will he accept that debate?
How many more times does he have to debate? I mean, he debated Joe Biden, and he knocked Joe Biden out of the race. So then he replaced Joe Biden with a candidate. It wasn't a very democratic process. I mean, she didn't get a single vote. She just kind of, had all the proxies lined up, and then he debates her. I think he won. Then you had, Vance, obviously debate Waltz, and there's no question he won. And now they want more debates. But I mean, how many more debates do we need? I mean, when he was on ABC,
but why not
for the first
debate
her? I was there. I mean, it was a 3-on-1 the entire time. It was the most unfair, and I mean, you saw it. You saw it in ABC stock. You saw it in the general reaction after the fact, right? But I mean, how many more debates does he need to do? Why does he have to be the one that keeps on doing debates against various people, different people, as they play whack-a-mole with new candidates every 3 days? I'm actually happy he's not doing it. I'm happy he's not going back into one of these kind of cesspools of unfairness. I don't think you could credibly say that the ABC debate was anything but a 3-on-1. I mean, I think the entire country saw that, and so how many more of those does he have to walk into? He gets to go on CNN and do the exact same thing where you know exactly where they stand politically. She wouldn't do a Fox debate. That. So I'm actually happy he's not. I think at this point, he was president for 4 years. Everybody knows exactly who Donald Trump is, what he stands for, what he represents. It's he's out there every single day doing interview after interview after interview, and you hardly see Kamala. It's kind of interesting, and yet she calls for a debate because I think they've lost the last two. They've certainly lost the last two on the presidential side, and the VP side they certainly lost the Vance debate. So.
And I want to circle back to some of the foreign policy issues you touched on. According to reports of Bob Woodward's new book, your father has spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin multiple times since leaving office. How recently has he had conversations with Putin?
I have no idea of any conversation with Vladimir Putin. I have no idea of any.
Has he not had a conversation?
Putin. I can't rule anything out because as I just said, I don't know, but I don't know of any conversation with Vladimir Putin.
If that's not the case, that he's had a conversation, he's touted having a good relationship with Putin. Is that relationship still in existence?
I think it's a great thing to have a good relationship with world leaders. And frankly, I think it's probably almost most important to have a good relationship with the Russian president. Russia sits on more nuclear weapons than any country in the world, and you better be able to pick up the phone in the middle of the night if something goes wrong. And have the ability to get through. My father was always peace through strength. Look, you had Obama who was talking about, the fact that we were going to go to nuclear war with North Korea. And, sure enough, 3 months later, my father goes walking into the country, shakes the hand of a person and created a, at least friendly relationship, right, between two world leaders. It's a hell of a lot better than having, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people die in a total catastrophe. I'm not saying he's a great guy. I'm not saying I stand for maybe anything that he stands for. But isn't it nice to actually have mutual respect? Isn't it nice to be able to put out the hand and have that handshake? I mean, you had Obama that was standing 15 miles away with the biggest binoculars you've ever seen, looking at North Korea. My father walks across the DMZ, across the line, and goes into North Korea, shaking hands with somebody. And it was the first time in literally generations that we've had a relationship to that country that we would have otherwise, probably had Americans die in a conflict with. I think that's a beautiful thing. And so I don't know why, so oftentimes the media thinks it's bad to have a good relationship with other world leaders, even when they're adversarial to this country, as clearly Vladimir Putin is in many ways. It's great to be able to pick up that phone. We need that kind of, we need that kind of relationship. We need that kind of diplomacy. And that's all gained by peace through strength. We're strong. We don't have that right now. We don't have that relationship. Biden can't pick up the phone to anyone. Kamala certainly can't pick up the phone. In fact, I don't think they'd answer that phone. They don't have respect for us. The entire world is lacking respect for the United States right now, and it breaks my heart to say that. They just don't see these as being strong, real people, and that's going to change very, very soon.
And when you talk about his foreign policy strategy, you mentioned peace through strength. It's also one that's centered on what he's called, America first. And that same book reported that he sent COVID tests to Putin. How does that jive with his America first strategy and prioritizing Americans, while at that time when we were in the height of a pandemic, sending needed COVID tests overseas?
Haley, honestly, I don't know what you're talking about. Sending COVID. I really think you're grasping for straws. Like, you're really trying on this one. I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, there's not a single person watching us right now that can't say that Donald Trump wasn't one of the greatest fighters that America's ever seen for our country's best interest. You would see it because you were there. He'd come off of Air Force One at 2:00 in the morning, and he'd talk about how America is the greatest country in the world, and we manufacture better than anybody, and we have better economy than anyone. We have a stronger military than anyone, and we're going to continue to lead the way. And we weren't going to allow countries around the world to rip us off, and we weren't going to let countries not contribute to NATO. And we're going to do it better and bigger than everyone else in the world. There's no one that's been a better cheerleader for this country. And you look at what we have right now. Again, a president who falls asleep on a beach at Monday. Midday on a Monday, right? Sunbathing on a beach. I mean, people don't respect that. You're really grasping at straws when you're talking about sending a COVID test to who? I don't even know if that's true. But I mean, come on. Come on. It's just crazy. I mean, you have vice president.
So let's talk about Iran then.
Hold on one second, Kaylee. I mean, you have why don't you ask, Kamala about, why we have 300. I personally have 4 friends who have lost kids to fentanyl. Right? We've had 320,000 children this year, not the entire term. It's over 1 million their entire term that have died to fentanyl poisoning. They're not doing a damn thing about it, and no one's asking them about it. I mean, what about the 20 million illegal immigrants that have come into this country? What about the fact that they sold my father's wall for scrap metal, meaning the pieces that were built that they just had to stand up? How about the fact that, you have an administration that's flowing in 300,000 people on aircraft into airports all across our nation, in the middle of the night? How about the fact that, every illegal immigrant's getting free health care in this nation, while, again, our country's 30th in the world in terms of education. We're not educating our kids nearly to the extent that we should. How about infrastructure in this country, which is totally crumbling, and we're not investing in ourselves while we send $200 billion to Ukraine, so they can bomb the hell out of, innocent young kids in trenches. I mean, when do we get serious? I mean, when do we get serious about the issues that are facing this country? We've got a big systematic hole in the roof of this nation. And we're debating whether or not a 6'5" man should be able to swim in female sports. I mean, we're not, these aren't serious people. And we're going to lose our #1 standing in the world if we don't get serious, and we don't get serious very, very quickly. And, it's a shame that you're asking about, a COVID test being sent over to Russia. I don't even think that's true, based on some sensational book of a guy who's made a career writing sensational books, versus asking like real journalistic questions. It's actually, it's
well, Eric, let me ask you then,
insane.
Would your father cut funding to Ukraine?
My father would stop the bloodshed. My father would stop the war. He's sick and tired of seeing people die on each side of this conflict. He's sick and tired of seeing cities get demolished to rubble. And he doesn't want to see World War III, which is what you're going to have. You have a country, Russia, that is sitting on more nuclear weapons than any country in the world, exactly tied with the United States. What do you think they're going to resort to if they started losing that conflict? You could probably answer the question. He wants to stop the bloodshed. He wants to stop the mass carnage. He wants to stop seeing innocent young boys in dirty trenches dying. And he's promised to get that war resolved before he even takes office, and there is no question he'll have the ability to do so.
And when it comes to the Middle East, has he spoken with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu since Iran's last ballistic missile attack?
I don't know, Haley.
Okay. And final question on the campaign. These last 3 weeks, your expectations for them?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a great 3 weeks. We have incredible momentum, and people have to get out, and they have to get to the polls, and they have to vote. Our country can do so much better than we're doing on every front right now. And I say that with every ounce of my heart. Our country can be doing so much better. We can be doing better on prices. We can be doing better globally. We can be doing better on the border. We can be doing better, from an education standpoint. We can restore free speech, which is largely diminished in this country. Freedom of religion, everything that we value in our Constitution. We as a nation are 100% under attack right now. We're not doing anything well, and we're losing the high ground to people who want to be that #1 spot, mainly China, and they're coming quickly. And we better get serious about how we run this country. And these people aren't serious. We've seen that in a hurricane disaster. We've seen that with illegal immigration. We've seen that with the economy. We've seen that with the cost of fuel and utilities. These people aren't serious, and they're destroying our country. They're irreparable harm is being caused to our country, and we're going to win. And I've never been more proud to stand by somebody's side because of the amount of hits and the amount of arrows that he's taken. As all he wants to do is put America first, and make our country great. And I've never been more proud of my father, and I've never been more proud of what he's fighting for, and the effort he's putting into that fight. So I think November 5th is going to be a great day for this country. And again, I couldn't be more proud of the man he is.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for being so generous with your time, and I do hope you all stay safe there in Florida too.
Thank you so much, Haley.